All right, I think it's time to get started here. Hopefully everyone can hear me okay. So, for those of you who don't know me, I am Dexter Bradford. I'm an attorney here at Beresford Booth, and today we're going to be talking about promissory estoppel. By now you've probably read my nice catchy title here, True or False. You can be sued for rescinding a gift. Any guesses? I'm sure you're all ready that it is most definitely true. Yes, absolutely. Because if it wasn't true, then we wouldn't have much to talk about. So, of course, it's true. Solution: what are we going to do about this? If you can be sued for giving a gift or taking back a gift, then what do? We just never give anyone to anything ever again. Period. Stop it. No more Christmas. No more Hanukkah. Never again. Obviously, that's not reasonable. So, what we're going to do is talk about promissory estoppel, the ins and outs of it, and how to avoid it. Now, before we get into what promissory estoppel is and how it works, though, I think it's important to back up and just get a basic understanding of some general contract principles. So, like, how do we form a contract? Because that helps us distinguish between what promissory estoppel is, because it's not a contract, as you'll see in a minute, and what an actual contract is. So, let's just look at some general principles of contract. So, in order to have a contract, we need three things. We need an offer, we need acceptance of that offer, and we need consideration. And we'll talk about what consideration means. So when we have an offer, we need that offer to be clear and unequivocal. Same with the acceptance. We need the acceptance to be a clear acceptance of that offer, and it needs to be unequivocal. And then consideration is kind of a funny word for quid pro quo, or something for a something. We need an exchange. We need an even or an exchange. And it doesn't have to be even, but it needs to be an exchange. So I can offer to give you my house for $1. That's obviously not an even trade. The house is worth a lot more than $1, but that's nonetheless consideration. I'm giving you the house, and in exchange, I'm getting $1. So if we have an offer and we have an acceptance, then we have a contract here. If I'm giving you my house for $1, bad example. But a better example is, let's say I offer to sell I'm a house painter. Let's say I'm a house painter, and I offer Joe Schmo, and say, hey, I'll paint your house if you give me $5,000. Joe says, great. You can paint it on Tuesday. $5,000 sounds great. I will pay you as soon as you finish painting the house. Well, I've given him an offer. He's accepted the offer. I'm going to paint the house. I go and paint the house. You owe me $5,000, and you better pay me the $5,000 or I'm going to do something like this and be really upset. Anyway. So now let's get to this bigger question. Are gifts contracts? If I tell you, hey, I'm going to give you my car, and it's a great car, is that a contract? We have an offer. We have an acceptance. If I say, I'm going to give you my car, I'm offering to give you my car if you'll take it, and you say, yeah, I'll take your car. And we have an offer, we have an acceptance, but what we're lacking here is consideration. So generally gifts are not contracts, because there's a lack of consideration. You need that consideration, you need that even exchange, or not even, you need an exchange in order for it to be a contract. Now, this is where the doctrine of promissory estoppel sort of complicates these things, because I've just told you that a gift is not a contract, but you can still be sued for taking a gift back. So how does it make sense that you can have a not contract, but then be sued over that? Well, promissory estoppel is defined as a promise which the promisor should reasonably expect to induce action or forbearance on the part of the promisee or a third person, and which does induce such action or forbearance is binding if injustice can be avoided only by enforcement of the promise. That is a lot of gibberish to basically mean, in English, the gift giver, let's say I'm the gift giver in this situation, and I intend to induce reliance on the part of you, the gift receiver, and you, the gift receiver, reasonably relied on the promise to your detriment. Now, we have two cases that I wanted to talk about today because I think that they're really interesting cases. And one illustrates what it means to reasonably rely on the case. The other one talks more about what is actual reliance and how you actually have to rely on a promise in order to have a good claim for promissory estoppel. Now, but before we get into those two cases, I'm going to shoot out a hypothetical scenario here. And just think about this hypothetical scenario in your head as we go through these two cases, and you think of whether or not there's a good claim for promissory estoppel, and maybe what some of the problem areas might be in this hypothetical scenario. So let's say in this hypo, I am a wealthy businessman, in my wildest, I'm dreaming here. And I have this beautiful Porsche. This is my car here. And we've been friends for a while. And you don't have a Porsche. Unfortunately, you don't have nearly as much money as I do, because I'm Warren Buffett and I have a bunch of money. And I'm telling you how we're at a coffee one day and we're chatting, and I'm telling you how I'm just so excited. I'm getting 2 brand new Porsches, so I'm not going to need this one anymore. And you're like, wow, really? It must be nice to have so many Porsches. I don't even have any. I can't afford them. And I tell you, well, we've been friends for a long time. I'll tell you what, I'm getting these 2 brand new Porsches. I don't need this one anymore. You can have it. And you're so excited. You're like, oh, yes, I'm so excited. I've always wanted this Porsche. I've envied it for so long. I'm so excited to drive this Porsche. And I say, yeah, it's going to be great. You're going to love it. It's such a fun car. But it really needs new tires, like really bad. Like, it is unsafe to drive in its current condition. I mean, I can drive it because I know what I'm doing, but you're going to want to get new tires for it right away. Like, I'm not going to give it to you unless you're getting new tires for this car, just because it's so unsafe. You got to get new tires for it immediately. And you're like, okay, yeah, no problem. We'll go get new tires for it. I'll buy the tires and I'll have them ready to go. So you give me the Porsche. And I say, great. Well, I'm going to go pick up my cars in about a week and a half, and then I'll give you mine. So a week and a half goes by and you don't hear anything from me. And meanwhile, you went to the store and you bought a pair of Porsche tires. And much to your dismay, you discovered that tires for this particular Porsche are very expensive. Let's say they were $5,000 tires, just insanely expensive tires. You spent $5,000 getting these tires for this Porsche, but you're like, you know what? It's going to be fine. I'm paying $5,000. I'm getting this really expensive car. It's going to be so great. I don't even care. It's going to cost me $5,000 now, but I have this awesome car, so I can't really complain. So you buy those tires, and when you buy the tires, the guy tells you, by the way, these are non-refundable tires. Are you sure you want these tires? And you say, yeah, I want these tires. I need them. I need these tires. I'm getting a Porsche. He says, congrats. So you buy the tires. Week and a half goes by. You've got the tires sitting in your garage. You're kicking them around, waiting for the Porsche to show up. And you call me and you're like, hey, where's that Porsche you promised me? And I said, oh, the dealer's running late. So don't worry about it right now. I'll get to you next week. Next week rolls around, still no Porsche, and you call me again and say, hey, where's that Porsche at? I thought you were going to give me that Porsche. I say, you know what? I'm so sorry. Dealer doesn't have those Porsches and I was going to get anymore, so I can't give you this one. I'm going to keep it. So sorry. And now you're stuck in a position where you just spent $5,000 on non-refundable tires. So keep the situation in your mind and the facts here as we go through these 2 cases, and think about the facts in these 2 cases and the holding and what the court decides. And then think in your mind about this hypothetical scenario and think whether or not you have a good case for promissory estoppel. So the first one is a fun case. I like it a lot. I studied it back in law school, called Conrad V Fields. This is a 2007 Minnesota case. So Marjorie Conrad was the plaintiff in this case, and Walter Fields, very similar scenario to ours here. You'll notice a lot of similarities. They met in the early 1990s. These guys were friends back before Walter was rich and famous. Then Walter Fields becomes a successful businessman over the years. And he becomes known for, Marjorie knows that he's not just a successful businessman, but he's also a philanthropist. He's one of the good guys. He likes to give out his money. He's got a lot of money, but he likes to help people out. She knows he has a lot of money. He just built a $1.2 million house in some fancy neighborhood in Minnesota, and he drives around in a Bentley. So he's got the appearance of wealth. He sure looks wealthy. He acts wealthy, and he gives out money to people. She knows that he's paid for people's educations before, which is very generous. So in around year 2000, Conrad here is working for a company called Quest Communications. She makes about $45,000 a year. So not bad. She makes a decent living. And the facts are really sparse in this case, so I like to insert my own ideas on how this conversation went down. But I imagine that Conrad is sitting here, out for coffee, or I don't know, maybe she's over at Fields Mansion and she's chatting about how hard her life is. And she's like, I just hate my job at Quest. I just don't like this industry. I don't like what I'm doing, and I want to get out of it. He's sick of it. The pay's not bad, but it's not great. And I just don't want to do this for the rest of my life. And Fields says something along the lines of, well, you should go to law school. You should be an attorney. You'd make a great attorney. You love to hear yourself talk, and you just love to argue with everybody. So you'd make a great attorney. That's all it really takes. That and a law degree. And she's like, you know what? You're right. I do love to argue with people and love to hear myself talk, so I would be a great attorney. And he's like, yeah, well, you should do it. Go to law school. And she's like, well, I can't though. I don't have the funds. Law school is really expensive. And I've still got like $5,000 left over from my undergrad. And this is when Fields kicks in and he says, you know what? You go to law school and I'll pay for it. I'll pay for your tuition and all your expenses. And she's like, are you serious? And he's like, yep, I'll do it. So he commits and he tells her that he's going to pay for law school and all the expenses. And she's so excited. She's always wanted to go to law school. She thinks she'd be a great attorney. So she goes to law school. She quits her job. She quits her $45,000 a year job at Quest and goes to law school. And he starts paying. At the beginning, yeah, he's paying for her expenses. And then after, I think it was about a year, after she starts law school, he's made a couple payments. She started at law school. She's doing really well. And all of a sudden, turns out the IRS has a little problem with how Mr. Fields has been making his money. And so they freeze all of his assets. He's no longer able to make payments. And she obviously is very concerned and considering dropping out of law school because how's she going to pay for the rest of it if her benefactor is not paying her? And so she calls him up and it's like, hey, this is not okay. I need to get this paid for. If you're not gonna be able to pay for it, let me know. And he sends her an email and says, don't worry about it. You know, you front it right now. If you finish law school and pass the bar, I thought that was interesting that he adds the and pass the bar thing at this point because he didn't mention that earlier. But all of a sudden that becomes a factor. But anyway, if he says, if you finish the law school and you pass the bar, I'm going to pay for your tuition and all your expenses. She says, okay, all right. So she does it. She finishes law school. She passes the bar exam. And she comes a knocking afterwards on Walter Field's door and says, look, I got my law degree right here. I got my bar license. Where's my money? I fronted all the costs. You said you were going to pay for it. Why don't you pay for it? And Fields gets a restraining order against Conrad and prevents her from talking with him anymore. So naturally, Conrad's pretty pissed. And thankfully, she went to law school and learned about the doctrine of promissory estoppel. However, I don't think that she actually learned about it in this case, because as you read through this case, you notice a couple of things. Like she actually, and you know this now better than she does, she sued him for breach of contract. And why is that wrong? That is the wrong way to go about this case. And why was that wrong? And if you were paying attention, you know, because this is not a contract. There was no consideration here. This was a gift promise. And gift promises are not contracts because there's no consideration. So it was wrong of her to go try and sue for breach of contract. Thankfully, the court has a little bit of grace on her, and they said, you meant promissory estoppel, right? And she's like, oh yeah, that's what I meant. I meant promissory estoppel. So anyway, she sues him for a promissory estoppel. And the court outlines, you can see here, she was going to law school. I don't think it was Harvard Law School. Maybe it was. And the court outlines the elements of promissory estoppel. They're like, we think you meant to do this one. And in order to show promissory estoppel, we need a clear and definite promise. Okay. Sounds like we had a clear and definite promise here. I mean, he said at the beginning, before she went to law school, he would pay for it. If she just went to law school and graduated, he would pay for it. So it sounds like a clear and definite promise. She even got it in an email. She even got an email, which was even better later on, saying, affirming, yeah, if you finish, and pass the bar, remember he added that little thing, then I'll pay for your law school tuition and your expenses. So yeah, check. We got a clear and we got a definite promise. The promisor intended to induce reliance by the promisee, and the promisee relied to their detriment. And then the third element, I think, is a kind of a moot point. I mean, the promise must be enforced to prevent injustice. I have a hard time envisioning a scenario where we have 1 and 2 and 3 doesn't work. But anyway, it's there. So really, I think of this as element 1 and 2 is 2 parts. So the promisor intended to induce reliance by the promisee. Well, it sounds like he did. He told her to go to law school. I mean, sounds like he intended her to rely on his promise. And the promisee relied to their detriment. So she relied to her detriment. But remember, we talked about earlier, it's got to be reasonable. So what does reasonable reliance look like? And was this reasonable? So the holding in this case, Conrad wins, just to spoil this for you. Fields owes her, it's like $87,000 that he ends up paying to her, which is not a small sum. I mean, good for her. She gets her law school paid for. And the court ruled that her reliance was reasonable given the circumstances. But why? Why was this reasonable? Why is this a good case of her reliance being reasonable? And so there's an important principle when you're looking at reasonable reliance. You look at it from the perspective of Marjorie. So it's from the perspective of the plaintiff. You'd hop into their shoes and you say, okay, if I was this person and I'm reasonable, would my reliance on this promise, would I think that's reasonable? So let's look at what she knows. She knows that, well, he's wealthy. She's known him for a while. She knows that he built a $1.2 million house in a nice neighborhood and he drives around in a Bentley. She didn't know he was actually just leasing it, but still he drives around in a Bentley. He has the appearance of wealth. So him saying, yeah, I'm going to pay for law school tuition sounds like he has the appearance, at least, like he could pay for it. It'd be a little different if she was talking to some random person out in the street that was, driving a 2001 Toyota Corolla like me, and was dressed in, baggy or bad looking old dirty clothes. And they just said out of nowhere, I'd pay for your law school. Might be a little bit different. You might say that's not reasonable, because, how are they going to pay for it? More importantly, he's a known philanthropist. This is what the court got hung up on. He's actually done this before with other people, and she knew about that. She knew that he'd paid for other students' educations before. And finally, I didn't put it in here, but also they were friends. They've been friends for a long time, over 10 years that they had known each other. And so if we take all those facts and we put ourselves in the shoes of Marjorie Conrad here, we say, well, we know this guy's wealthy. We know he's good for the money, or at least he should be good for the money. It turns out he wasn't, but that's not her fault. Under her, when we put ourselves in her shoes, it appears like he's good for the money, and it's reasonable to think so. He's a philanthropist. He's done this for other people. It's not like something way out of character. It's not like he's the stingiest guy in the world, and then all of a sudden he says this while he was drunk one night. This was something that he had done previously. So, and they were friends for a long time. So why wouldn't he do that for her? So if you put yourself in Marjorie Conrad's shoes, you'd say, yeah, that is reasonable reliance. That reliance was reasonable. Now, keep that in case in mind. We'll go back to our previous hypo in a minute. But let's talk about the next case. The next case is a good example of what actual reliance looks like. And this is a more clever argument on the part of the defendants here, rather than just saying that it was unreasonable to rely on the promise like Fields did. Fields was like, oh, I shouldn't have relied. It was unreasonable, which didn't work. And the argument here doesn't work either, just to spoil you. But it's a better argument in my mind. So in Feinberg B Pfeiffer, Pfeiffer is a company. This is a 1959 Missouri case, and Feinberg is an employee of Pfeiffer Co. Feinberg was a great employee. She's at this company for 39 years, and she's thinking about retiring, but she's great friends with the president. The president of the company absolutely adores her. She's the best. She's super loyal. She's been at this company for a long time, and he wants to reward her. So in her later years there, she's been getting a lot more stuff. She keeps getting salaries, increases and bonuses, and her salary gets increased from $350 to $400 per month, which is, funny to say now, but that was a 1959 case. So I'm sure it was a lot back then, or at least it was pretty good. Now, the board of directors has a meeting, and they decide, she's probably going to retire soon, but we want to do something nice for her. She's been loyal to this company. She's been super great. We want to do something beyond just the bonuses and raises that we've been giving her. We want to set her up for life. So they decide they're going to pay her an increased salary, like I just said, of $350 to bumping her up from $350 to $400 a month. And then upon retiring, they're going to pay her $200 per month for life. That's what the board of directors decides. And the president signs off on it, and then he goes and he tells her. As soon as they finish this, he says, by the way, so this is what we just decided on. Congratulations. You've been a great employee. We love you. Here's a raise. And whenever you decide to retire, we're paying you $200 a month for life. And this the terms of this didn't change her ability to retire. It didn't change Feinberg's ability to fire her at will. So everyone's position pretty much stayed the same. She's just getting a raise and this $200 for life promise out of nowhere. So she's thrilled about it, but she doesn't leave the company immediately. She enjoys her new salary raise and stays for a while. She stays for about a year and a half. And And then she finally quits and she leaves, and she decides to take her $200 per month. And a couple months, unfortunately, a couple months after she decides to leave, the president, the guy that she's good friends with, dies. And his widow takes over the company. And then a few months after that, she gives it to what was the president's son-in-law. So son-in-law takes over, and the son-in-law walks into this company, has no relationship with Feinberg, walks into the company and finds out that they're paying $200 per month to this woman that he has no idea why. He's like, why are we paying $200 a month to this woman? And the board of directors tells him, well, you know, she's great. And he's like, no, this is a gift that we're just giving away $200 per month. And he has a different business strategy than his father-in-law did, and he doesn't want to pay her. So he tells her, hey, we're not going to be paying you that $200 a month anymore. Instead, you're going to get $100 a month. And Feinberg here says no. She rejects that $100 a month. She says, no, I'm entitled to 200. Your father-in-law told me 200, and I'm sticking to my 200. So she brings lawsuit against him and says, you owe me $200 a month. You know, they hadn't been paying it for a long time. And she says, I want that $200 a month. Now, Pfeiffer's position was, well, this was just a gift. It's not a contract. This was just a gift. We don't even have to pay you anything. So I don't know what you think you have here. Now, Feinberg actually wins this case. And this was a good example of actual reliance. So she wins. The company has to pay her back. And the court finds that there was sufficient evidence that she relied on the promise when quitting the job. Now, you might be thinking like, okay, well, yeah, I can see that this is promissory estoppel, but the company actually made a good argument here. They said that, listen, she just retired. She wasn't relying on the promise when she quit. She just retired because she was going to retire anyway. The promise had nothing to do with her quitting her job, which was a smart argument. I actually thought this was a good argument, because if you go back, let's just sort of jump back really quick. We'll look at promissory estoppel. The gift giver intended to induce reliance on the part of the gift giver, and you reasonably relied to your detriment. So there's more facts in this case. I didn't want to go too deep into the facts because there's quite a bit in this case. But she can't work later on. She gets cancer after she quits, not too long, and after she quit, and she wasn't able to work after that. But what the court did was they looked at whether or not she was just, they relied solely on her testimony as to whether or not she could have kept working, or if she was relying on the $200 a month when she decided to retire, if that was a factor in her deciding to retire. And she testified that, yes, I could have kept working at the time, but I decided to quit at that time because I figured I could live no problem off the promised income. So I decided to quit my job. And she didn't look for other jobs afterwards. So, and that was all the court needed. And if you're an employer, this is important to know, because that was all the court needed to say, yep, she reasonably relied. It was just her simple testimony that she said, yeah, when I quit, I was relying on it. Her saying, yes, I relied on it, was enough for the court to say, great, then we have all the evidence that we need. She reasonably relied on this, and you're going to have to pay her that $200 a month. So now let's go back to our Porsche example. So I was the wealthy businessman in the scenario, and you were the person receiving the Porsche. You spent some money on some tires. What do we think? Was this a good case for promissory estoppel? Do we have a good case here? And you're probably thinking, yeah, it sounds pretty good. And I think you're right. I think that is a good case for promissory estoppel. It's pretty similar to that first case we talked about. It's similar to the Conrad V Fields case. Sure, but let's break it down anyway, because why not? But I'm a wealthy businessman. What do you know? Is your reliance reasonable? Let's see. I'm a wealthy businessman. I've told you that I have this Porsche. It's an expensive car. I have the appearance of wealth. You always see me walking around in business meetings and in nice suits, and I drive expensive cars. I just told you that I'm buying 2 new Porsches, and I don't need this one anymore. Well, if I can afford 2 new Porsches and I'm giving away this one, I think you could make a strong argument that it was reasonable for you to rely, reasonable for you to say, yeah, I believe him. I've been friends with him for a while, and he's got a bunch of money, and he's going to give me this Porsche. Now, did you reason for the delay? Yes, check. We've got that box covered. Now, was it to your detriment? Yeah, sounds like it. You bought a pair of non-refundable $5,000 tires that you can't do anything else with. They're sitting in your garage. You can't take them back, and you can't put them on any of your cars because they were made to fit that particular Porsche. Now, let's change the facts a little bit and say, well, if I had gone out, like let's say that I wasn't giving you a Porsche, but I was giving you another car that happened to have the same pair of tires as another car that you own, and you had just bought tires for that other car. And so you thought, oh, well, I just bought the tires for that other car. I could just slap them on this Porsche. Now, in that instance, I don't think that you'd have a good case for promissory estoppel because you haven't relied to your detriment at that point. You purchased tires for a car that you already own. And you instead, after finding out about getting this other car, decided that you just stick them on there. If you hadn't purchased any other tires, then you probably don't have a good case for promissory estoppel because you've suffered no detriment. So yeah, I think the Porsche example, I think that we do have a good case for promissory estoppel. If you have any other questions about general principles of contracts or what promissory estoppel looks like in practice, or if you think you have a claim for promissory estoppel, you can call us or send me an email. I'm happy to chat about it. But that's all I have for today. We've been talking about contracts for almost half an hour now, and I'm sure you're bored out of your mind. So I'll let everybody else go. Hopefully you enjoyed it a little bit and learned something new. So thanks.